Hi, good morning and good evening, everyone. In today's session, we'll be discussing about a roles concept in Fusion applications and user management and functional setup manager. In roles concept, we'll be understanding what are the different type of roles we have, and when you compare with EBS, okay, we'll go with the comparison like which role is equal to which concept in EBS, and what are the different type of users can be created in the Fusion applications and what is the purpose we'll be discussing. And finally, we'll just discuss about function setup manager FSM. What is the purpose? Okay, in the Fusion environment, to I mean, where this can be useful, what we can do with this, everything we'll be discussing today. Okay, first I will go with the roles concept. Okay, the roles concept in the Fusion basically we call as the security model. In other words, you can say security model. You can say in Fusion we call as role based access control. In short, you can say RBAC, role based access control. Even in EBS also we have a concept called as role based access, right? So, but the role based access function is applicable only for web pages. Even when we are creating, before we go and create the bank account, we'll be giving the grants. We'll be providing the grants through user management. The same in procurement and other areas also. You can assign specific role to the user so that according to the user will get a privileges to work on specific area, right? In that way, we have a role based concept, but that is very limited function which you can see in the EBS. But Fusion point of view, complete security model will run through this role based access only. So okay, so now just we'll focus on that. So when you talk about role based access control, we have a different type of roles. Basically we have job role, we have a job role, and we have other role called as a duty role, and we have data role and abstract role. Okay, these are the four type of roles we have in Fusion and Fusion application. Okay, job role, duty role, data role, abstract role. Okay, there are the four type of roles we have. To understand about these roles, just just will go through this the concept as per EBS. In EBS, what we do is, say for example, if I want to work on accounts payables, if I want to work on accounts payables, what we have to do is, okay, we have to create the responsibility, right? We have to create the responsibility. After creating responsibility, again we have to assign the operating unit and the primary ledger. These assignments we have to do. Okay, just let me list out here. So as per EBS, we have a menu, and within the menu you can have a sub menus, and within that you can have a functions. And if you want to have access to specific menu or sub menu or function, we should create responsibility by selecting the respective menu or sub menu or I'm sorry. Okay, if you want to access to specific menu or sub menu or particular function, we have to create the responsibility. We have to create responsibility. Okay, so while we are creating the responsibility, we'll be selecting required menu or sub menu or functions. Okay, we can just, as we know, we can create our own menus or sub menus or function, which we call a custom. So we'll create the responsibility. Once you create the responsibility, you cannot use that responsibility to record the business transaction. What required? We have to assign. Okay, we have to assign the primary ledger. If it is just GL responsibility, only primary ledger. If it is going to be sub-ledger related, along with the primary ledger, we have to assign the operating unit also. Assign primary ledger, operating unit, or just primary ledger to responsibility. Now this responsibility you can use to record the business transaction. Of course, we have to do the required configuration, then we can start using this responsibility to have a transaction process. Okay. So this is the process we follow in EBS. First, what we do is we'll have a menu concept. Menu consists of submenus. Within the submenus, we can have function. If you want to access to a specific menu or submenu or function, we have to create the responsibility. While you are creating responsibility, we'll be choosing it. We know that. So once primary ledger is ready, once responsibility is ready, we'll be assigning the primary ledger and operating it to responsibility. Finally, we'll assign responsibility to user. Okay, this is the practice we are following. In Fusion case, these are the roles we have, and in EBS we have a concept called as responsibility, but in Fusion we don't have any concept called as responsibility. Okay, again, how these roles are, okay, have some similarity with these EBS menus or submenus. When you talk about job role is equal to menu only. Job role is equal to menu. As per EBS, it's a menu. So in payables, we have a seeded menu called as, okay, AP navigate GUI 12. Okay, that you can just, the place of that kind of menu, they are giving the role called as job role. Job roles are equal to menus when you compare with the EBS. Fine. Then duty role. Okay, say for example, like let me take this is equal to menu as per EBS. And when I talk about duty role, okay, duty role is equal to submenu. Okay. Here, see, when I talk about menu, here we have a something AP navigate GUI 12. Here, when we talk about job role, they're given, say, menu name as, job role name as accounts payable manager. Okay, this is equal to this menu. The same way here, when you talk about submenu you may have like something, say, AP invoices. The same way here, equal to this, in Fusion we have role called as, okay, payables invoice duty. That's how they're given. Okay, and anyway here we'll have a functions as a part of submenu. As a part of duty role also will be having the multiple functions or features. Now what is the data role? Okay, here if you look into this responsibility, we are creating the responsibility we are assigning, okay, the primary ledger and operating we are assigning to responsibility. That means it's like primary ledger or operating net plus responsibility. So this combination we require to record the business transaction equal to this. Okay, equal to this. Here we are using the responsibility in EBS. Why we are using the responsibility? To select the menu or submenu. Okay, to select the menu or submenu. If there is, I mean, if any option is available, straight away we can assign our primary ledger and operating it to menu or submenu. But we don't have any option in EBS directly to map primary ledger or operating it to menu or submenu without creating the responsibility. That is the reason to select menu or submenu we are getting responsibility. Finally, we are assigning primary ledger or operating it to responsibility. So there is no possibility in EBS where we can map our primary ledger or operating it to menu or submenu. But in Fusion we have that flexibility. So say for example, I have a job role called as accounts payable manager. Okay, accounts payables manager. For accounts payables manager, I want to just assign one operating unit. As per Fusion, we know, like we call as business unit. Okay, we want to assign the business unit to accounts payables manager. So you don't need to create any responsibility here. We have a role called as job role called as accounts payables manager. Simply we can map our business unit to this. Okay, that means data role is nothing but the combination of, okay, data role is nothing but the combination of job role plus, so BU. If you are going to take example related to GL, in that case job role plus primary ledger. Okay, the data role is equal to job role plus business unit. Example, accounts payables manager. Say if you are going to have a business unit, so operating unit for India, I'll say ERP3 India business unit. This combination, okay, the job role plus business unit. Business unit name I'm giving as ERP3 India business unit. This combination we call as data role. Why we are calling as data role? This is job role. Through this job role, we can have access. We can have access to the data which is belongs to specific business unit. If you take example of GL related data role, the job role, then we'll be having say like a specialist, okay, general accounting specialist plus primary ledger. That combination means through that job role you can have access to specific ledger. That combination also you can call as data role. Okay, here when you compare this data role, if you compare this data role with EBS, it is equal to this. Okay, so here job role to job role we are mapping the business unit, but in EBS directly we cannot map our operating unit to any menu. That is the reason we are creating responsibility. If you are assigning the primary ledger or operating to responsible, nothing but, okay, you are assigning the same to menu which is there in the responsibility. Okay, you can just comparison point of view, the data role is more or less equal to responsibility in EBS, where already primary ledger or operating unit assigned. With that combination you can compare. And another role is abstract role. See here, when you talk about job, duty or data roles, these will be very specific to particular application. For payables, we'll be having the separate job roles, duty roles, and data roles. For receivables, fixed assets, general ledger. For each and every application, we'll have a specific job, duty, and data roles. But when I talk about abstract role is not specific to any application. This is a common role which will be used across the application for any user. That is nothing but abstract role. Example is employee. Okay, it's not like employee is not very specific to particular application. It's a very generic common role which can be used for any user will be just whom we will create in the system as a user, will be acting as a, should act as an employee to just support or to process certain activities in the system environment. So abstract role means common role. It's not specific to any application. Okay, so abstract role, one example I'm just giving employee, or else you can take as a contingent worker, contract employee, any like a resource people that you can take as a this abstract role. Okay, so majorly we have these four type of roles: job, duty, data, and abstract. Job role is equal to menu as per EBS, duty role is equal to sub menu, data role here data role is equal to, I mean, what exactly data role means? Job role plus business unit. When you compare with EBS, responsibility where we already assigned primary ledger or operating unit. That combination. Abstract role means common role. When you talk about all these four type of roles, see these job roles are seeded, duty roles are seeded, and abstract roles are seeded. Data role system will create based on, so basically system will create the data roles. When you create the primary ledger, automatically system will create the data roles, And when you create the business units, system will create the data roles automatically. Or else say when you create the say like fixed assets, corporate book or tax book, whatever the definition, system will create the data roles automatically. If you create inventory organization, system will create the data roles automatically. That means this is system, I mean this system will create, okay, based on our system configuration, based on the organization definitions which you do in the system. Rest of roles are seeded in the system. Okay, we can create our own job roles or duty roles also. That also will be covering in these sessions. Okay, so job, duty, data, and abstract roles, this is what we have. This system will create, rest all are seeded, which comes along with the product. Now if anybody has any questions on this roles concept, you can ask me, we'll discuss. Any questions from anyone? Can we assign multiple primary ledgers? Or one second, I have one question. I request someone like to mute yourself. Who is Praveen? Yeah, please.
Yeah, question I am having a question.
Yeah, please, Praveen, tell me.
For example, if a duty role is having payable invoice duty, it means that the user is able to enter only invoices.
No, I'm not getting your voice. There is a lot of breakage in the voice.
No, actually, see, are you able to hear me now?
Yeah, somewhat better. Yeah.
Yeah. See, the duty role is having payable invoice duty in the sense the user only having invoice entry responsibility, right? For example, duty, right?
Yeah, exactly. The user will have a privileges to create the invoices only.
That is the only duty he's having, right?
Exactly.
There is specification in each and every role, right?
Sorry?
There is a segregation, like everyone has, for example,
Correct. Based on the employee responsibility in the company, accordingly we can assign the specific duty roles to the user.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And I have other question from Ramakrishna here. Can we assign multiple primary ledgers or operating unit to one data role? Yes, we can do that. Here one more point, okay, to answer your question. So data roles can be created in two ways. One is system will create whenever you create the primary ledger or business unit. That is one option. The second option is we can create our own data roles also as per requirement by grouping. Okay, we can create our own data roles. That is also possible. Yeah. Any other question? We'll be covering how to create our own data roles also. We'll see that, how to create the security profiles, and we have some other concepts where we can create them. We'll see that. So any other question on this roles concept? Fine. If no question means we can proceed. So the next point here to discuss is user management. One question. Yeah, please Ram, you can ask me. Just you can type that question in chat window, or else you can ask me directly by muting yourself. What about reports? Yeah, reports also. Reports are just mapped with the roles only. As per requirement, you can deselect or you can select. Here, those are mapped with the roles. Here, like in EBS, what we do when we are creating responsibility for which reports or requests user require access. Accordingly, we'll be assigning the request group to responsibility. But here, since we are not creating any responsibility kind of definition, though how we can access the reports can be accessed based on the roles which we are assigning to the user, and again you can customize as per your need. That is possible. Okay, done. Yeah. So here, user management. So when you talk about the user management, how the users can be managed in the system, basically we can create the users from, one option is from IDM, as we discussed, identity manager. And other place is we can create the user from HCM, human capital management. Okay, from IDM you can create the users, or else you can create the user from HCM, human capital management. Okay, so IDM is equal to, like, when you compare with the EPS sysadmin only. In sysadmin you can create the users in the same way you can create the user in IDM. But when you create the user in sysadmin, what we do is first we'll create the user, then we'll assign employee to user. Employee to user. We'll create the user and we can assign the employee to user. In EBS, when you create the user from sysadmin. But if you create the user from IDM, you can create the user. Okay, here just we'll create assign employee to the user, then we'll assign responsibilities, right? This is what majorly we'll do. Okay, we'll assign the responsibilities to user. This is the task will be performed. But if you create the user from IDM, okay, IDM, what you can do is you can create the user and you can assign here equal to responsibilities. In Fusion we have a roles, which role and all will basically data roles. Just let's call it as role. We'll assign roles to user. This is what we'll do. We cannot assign any employee to IDM user. If you create any user from IDM, okay, just you can create the user and you can assign the roles to the user, but you cannot assign the employee to the user. That means if you are going to use that user for the certain processes where approvals required or some other activity need to be taken place by following some kind of limited approvals or authorization limits, that kind of activities cannot be performed by IDM user. Okay, if you want to go with employee assignment, what we have to do is you have to create the user from HCM. If you are creating the user from HCM, it is nothing but you are creating employee as well as user at a time. Okay, so IDM means just you are creating the user. If you are creating the user from HCM, you are creating at a time employee plus user. In EBS, what we do, like, we'll create the employee and we'll be creating the user. Employee definition separate and user definition separate. Again, that employee need to be assigned to the user. But the both actions, both activities we can perform at a time, okay, by using HCM application. The HCM, through HCM, straight away you can create the employee and the user automatically. But in HCM, you can create the employee user. Simply we call as employee user. So let me just say the basically type of users, we can say implementation user and employee user. Okay, implementation user you can create from IDM and the employee user you can create from HCM, human capital management. So implementation user IDM will create and will be assigning the roles. But when you talk about employee user, you will be creating the employee plus user credentials for the employee. And once you create the user from HCM, automatically that user information will be available in IDM. Okay, whatever the user you create from HCM, that user information will be synchronized with IDM application. From there only you can assign the roles to user. So when you create the employee user, you can create the user. You cannot assign any roles from HCM. Only the option to assign the roles to the user is IDM. And how these two are different? Just simple point here. Just user, here user plus employee. That's how you can find the difference. But when you talk about the system process and all financial point of view, with IDM user or employee user, you can perform all the activities, implementation related all the activities, but only that difference is between these two users. With employee user, system will allow you to create the supplier sites, but with implementation user you cannot create the supplier sites. If you want to create the supplier site, it's a mandatory you should work as a, you will be, I mean, you will have a employee user login to do the configuration of supplier site definition. Except supplier site financial point of view, except supplier site, rest of all can be done by implementation user. Okay, and when you talk about procurement sides, there are some other limitations if you are going to work as implementation user. Okay, that's what we have to understand. Basically we have two type of users. One is implementation user, other one is employee user. Implementation user just user where we cannot map the employee to that user. When you talk about employee user, employee is nothing but employee plus user. So this is how we can find it. And if you want to work as a implementation user, okay, if you want to work as implementation user, so we have to assign certain roles to that user. Okay, so if you are, say for example, you are creating one user called as implementation user called as ERP tree. Okay, now for the user called as IDM, say I'm going to create the user from IDM. Okay, if I want to allow this user to do all the system related configuration, we have to assign certain roles. We have to assign certain roles. In EBS, what we do, if you have access to system administrator responsibility, you can start doing all your system configuration. So similar to that, okay, that means we are user will have access to system administrator responsibility, so that that user can perform all the system configuration. Similar to that, we have to give the privileges to the user where that user can do all the system related configuration by assigning certain roles. Okay, what roles we have to assign to the implementation user? Basically we have to assign roles called as application implementation consultant role we have to assign, and we have to assign IT security manager. Basically these two roles we have to assign. Okay, so these two roles we have to assign. Along with that, just now we in current environment we have to assign system administrators. Okay, because the current version which we are using is release 8 version. Because for training purpose this is the only instance we can find. We have this on-premise instance release 8. In release 8 what we have to do is basically these two roles are enough. If you are going to work on release 9 or 10 or 11 any other versions, higher versions, these two roles are enough. But only in case of release 8, along with these two roles we have to assign one more additional role called as system administrator. Then you'll get all privileges to work on the implementation project creation, rest of all the activities, what activities we can perform we'll be discussing. But as a implementation consultant you will have all the rights to do the system configuration if you assign these three roles to the user. And release 8 we have to assign these three. If you are going to work on 9 or higher versions, this is not required. Of course system also won't accept in higher versions to select it. Only these two roles are enough. Okay, this is the point we have to understand. And you can make employee user also as a implementation user. If you want to make employee user, first you create that user from HCM, then you can assign these two roles to these three roles. Okay, in case of this current version or else higher versions, only these two roles. That's how you can make employee user also to behave as a, I mean to do the system configuration as a implementation user. Okay, that's how we can do it. Okay, so these are the simple points to understand before we just get into the application. When you are going to create the user, first initially we'll be creating the IDM user, later we'll create the HCM user. To create the HCM user, basically we require legal entity and we require business unit information. Without business unit and legal entity information you cannot create the HCM user. Those are mandatory fields which we have to provide just to specify the employee is working for which business unit. Such that kind of information we have to provide. So when we are going to start with this practice and all, there is no option where we can create, since we are legal entities and the business units are not ready. First we'll create the IDM user, then we'll start doing the required configuration and all. Once we identify the once we create these legal entities and business units, then we can switch to HCM user definition. From there, you will be using the HCM user only. Okay, so this is what we are going to see in these sessions. So if anybody has any question on this user related points like IDM user, HCM user, purpose, etc., you can ask me. Any questions on this?
Lakshman,
Yeah.
this is Ram. Lakshman, am I audible?
Yes.
Lakshman, you mentioned that these are the in the ERP tree. You have these two assigned to the IDM, which is Identity Manager Created Role, Application Implementation Consultant, and IT Security Manager. So
Correct.
these are seeded.
Seeded,
Yes.
and
So-
when you want to classify these role types, this you can call as job roles.
Okay. So these roles, based on the requirement, can we customize? I mean, can we create our own roles, or do we have to use only the ones that are seeded?
No, not required, because basically you should get access to the environment from which environment you can do the system configuration. The simple point is
Okay.
when you compare with the, one second here, just let me talk about some one point. So when you talk about EBS, what happens is if you assign the some seeded user, say accounts payable payables AP Navigate GUI or AR Navigate GUI menu for particular responsibility, what happens is we'll be having the environment where if I go to the payable super user responsibility, right? So there we can have access to configuration part as well as transaction part, right? From the same, if you
That's
use the seeded menu, like you'll be having access to system configuration as well as invoice creation, payment creation and all. But in Fusion, you don't find in that way. If you assign these roles, application implementation consultant and IT security manager, primarily application implementation consultant, IT security manager, there is some purpose we'll be discussing when we are working on that. But basically, you have to assign application implementation consultant. If you assign, that will give you access only for configuration part. You never get access to transaction related functions.
Okay, you had to be an employee
For that, we have separate roles.
to have access to that.
Sorry?
Okay, we have separate roles.
Yeah,
Okay.
separate roles.
For that, we have separate roles.
Yes.
Okay. So one last question.
Yeah.
See, let's say I have access to those transactions like invoice or payments.
Hmm.
So in EBS, we have to customize that responsible to make it read only. So do we have anything that has
Yeah,
already
we-
been seeded
Yes,
to
yes,
make
yes.
things?
Yes, we have for everything we have for each function we have. You can set read only or just full
Okay.
privileges. Everything you can set. That we'll see when we are creating the custom roles.
Okay.
We'll create the
Okay.
custom roles.
That's what my question was for custom roles. We have it. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Any other questions? Any other questions, please?
Lakshman Suresh here.
Yeah, Suresh.
First, one question like, I mean, in Artwell we have some dependencies like employee user assignment. So, do we have any, I mean, such dependencies in Fusion? Like, see, in AJS, if you assign employee to user, then only you can find the user in setups. So, such kind of dependencies. Are there any dependencies in Fusion?
See, basically what happens here, that such kind of dependency we have. Here what happens is, if you don't mind, can you mute yourself so that I'll be answering meantime? Yeah, thanks. So here, if you are going to work as a just implementation consultant where you are not going to touch the process related to employee, in that case, just you can use IDM user. Okay, wherever you are going to have with a dependency with the employee, where employee specific transaction activities you are going to perform, or any employee related activities you are going to perform in the system, always you have to create the user from HCM. Only this IDM user will be using for the purpose of just to start with implementation, not more than that. Even as a consultant also will be creating one HCM user. When we are starting the implementation, we'll go with the IDM user. After creating the business group, after creating the legal entity and the business unit, then even for our configuration purpose and testing purpose also we have to create the user from HCM. Okay, there is a dependency we should use Finally, it's same user only. Suresh, did I answer your question? Okay, fine. So that's what it's a mandatory. Just you have to go with the same user only to perform employee specific transactions. Okay, done. Any other questions? Okay, no, fine. So done. Now what we'll do is we'll switch to next other concept called as functional setup manager. Okay. Short we call as FSM. Okay. So when you talk about EBS, in EBS we have some similar concept, but it's limited to very specific features. So in general ledger application we have a accounting setup manager. In GL we have a in R12 accounting setup manager. By using accounting setup manager, you can do the multiple configuration setups. You can create the primary ledger, you can create the secondary ledger, reporting ledger, right? And you can create the legal entities, the assignments and sequencing. Even you can create from their business units. Of course, some navigation path is available from there. Everything you can create. But those setups are very limited. Whatever we discuss, just those you can create from accounting setup manager, ASM in EBS. Similar to that, we have a functional setup manager in Fusion, but in this functional setup manager, you can do all the configuration. Whatever the configuration you want to do for any application, you can do it only from functional setup manager. If you assign this role, whatever the role we discussed, this application implementation consultant role, okay, if you just assign this role to any user, the user will get access to functional setup manager so that that user can start with the implementation process. Okay, the user can start with the implementation process. So before we get into this functional setup manager, let's look into the terminology what we have to understand. So we have applications called as financials and SCM and CRM, right, and HRMS applications and projects, etc., etc. Okay, these are the different product families we have. The same product families, as per functional setup manager, will be calling as offerings. Financials we call as one offering, and SCM we call as one offering. CRM we call as offering. HRMS, the product, the family of application we call as one offering. Project suite we call as offering. Here offering will refer a group of applications which falls under same product family. Okay, so financially is one offering and SCM is one offering, CRM, HRM projects all are comes under offerings. Okay, when you say financials, within the financial we have application called as say GL, APR, CMF, etc. We have multiple applications we have, but financials we are calling as offering. Within the offering we have a different application. Those applications we call as options. Okay, option, this we call as just option. This is another option which is available as a part of financials. Okay, so financials we are calling as offering, and within the financials what are the modules we have. Each module we call as one option, and within this particular module means within the option will be having the features that will remain same as we'll be calling as features only. Okay, so we have a offerings. Within the offerings we have options, nothing but applications or say modules. Within the module will be having the features. Okay, so this is the terms we have to understand: offerings and options. Offering is nothing but product family, option is nothing but particular application. So now in Fusion, okay, if you want to start with the setup in case of EBS, what we do, we'll just access the system administrator to create the responsibilities and all. In the similar way, in Fusion we'll have access to functional setup manager to start with our system configuration. But the difference is in EBS, when you are doing the project, so which applications you are going to implement and who are the team members are going to work, what are the time schedule, what are the tentative project schedules, and everything will be managing outside of the system definitely. But in the fusion, if you want to create any project, if you want to do any configuration, system configuration, it's a mandatory. First, you have to create the project. Okay, you have to create the project. You have to create the implementation project. You have to create the implementation project. After creating the implementation project, you have to select which offerings you are going to implement as per the project scope. What are the offerings you are going? I mean, what are the offerings you are going to implement for that implementation? You are going to configure for the as a part of that implementation. You have to select. Okay, you have to first create the implementation project, then you have to select the offerings. Within that, what options you require, you have to select. Finally, you will be creating the, then you can start with the system configuration. To discuss bit more detail, what we have to do is, if you are going to start, if you want to start with your system configuration, you have to go to functional setup manager. There what we have to do is, so within the product, what are the offerings are available, all you can see, you can just go and see that. But as per your project scope, you have to go and enable the offering. First, what we have to do is, say we have all these offerings. Here we have all these offerings. But for, say, for our client, we are going to implement only financials and do SCM. In that case, what we have to do, the financials and SCM offerings we have to enable. First, we have to enable offerings. Which offerings are going to be scope are in the scope of implementation project. So when you are selecting these offerings, again within that offering, which option you require. Say financials we are going to implement. In the financial offering, we have scope for only GL, AP, AR, okay, and FA only. We are not going to implement cash management. In that case, you have to select only those 4 options. Okay. So first we have to enable offering, and along with the offering, within that will be enabling options also. Within that we have to enable, I'll say enable offerings and options. So it's very similar to like currency. We'll enable the currency in EBS, right? We'll enable currency. If you enable the currency, then that currency will be available when we are going to create the primary ledger, or if you are enabling some foreign currency, that will be available at the time of transaction creation. Similar to that, which offerings you are going to implement for your client, those offerings, and within that, which options you are going to implement, you have to select. Okay, that is the first step. First, we have to enable offerings and options. Then you can create implementation project. Okay, you can create implementation project. First, we'll enable offerings or options. Then we'll create implementation project. After creating the implementation project, what are the offerings you enable? You have to select those offerings and options into your implementation project. Say select offerings and options for project. Just say select offerings and options into your implementation project. Okay, why we are enabling? To select into implementation project. That once you select it, what you can do is automatically system will create the task list. System will create task list. Okay, so very simple. Say for example, I selected offering called as financials. Within that offering, I selected option called payables. So if you want to do the payables, we know like what configuration need to be done for payables. If you want to create do the setups for payables, we have to set up payable options, financial options, payment terms, distribution sets, and we have to create the bank branch bank account, payment process profile, suppliers. Okay, this sort of configuration we have to complete for payables. Since you are selecting here offering as a financials and option as a payables, so to do the setups for payables, whatever the task we require, automatically system will create the task list. With the help of task list, we'll be able to we'll be able to do the system configuration. Okay, this we'll see when we are working on the system, but just try to understand the process. when we are going to do this all this act when we are going to do the implement in the fresh environment, first we have to enable the offerings, then we'll create the implementation project. For the project, which are the offerings and options required, will be selecting. Once you select, then system will create the task list. With the help of task list only we can do the system configuration. Then we'll have an option where we can assign particular offering or option or specific task or task list tasks to specific team member. Okay, so we can assign the offerings or a particular option or task to team member, so that that team member should work for the respective configuration. That's how we can do the assignment. Even project also can be assigned to specific person who will be just acting as a project manager or someone else. Then what we can do is, once the team member will start working on the project, say the team member started working on financials, then the team member should can give the update on that, as the project, whether financials implementation is started or in progress or completed, the status updates can be done. Okay, status we can track. Okay, we can track the status. Okay, so basically these activities we have to perform. Once we're done with that, okay, based on what they are doing, just we can track the status, we can assign to whom we assigned and what is the status, whether started or not. Then once we that is in progress also, that can be done. Then finally we'll start with the system configuration. Then project manager can monitor the task and they can track the statuses. Sorry. So this is what this and all we can perform from functional setup manager. Okay, in functional setup manager we can enable the offerings and options whatever required for your project. You can create the project, you can select those offerings and options. Based on selection of offerings and options, somebody just yep. So based on the selected offerings and options, system will create the task list. Okay, then you can assign the particular offering or options or task to respective team members, so that they'll be start working on that. They can update the progress of the work what they are doing. That is nothing but we call as status tracking. And finally we can start with the system configuration. Okay, or else let's take in this way. Okay, then we'll start doing the system configuration, and what are the progress of configuration, that everything can be tracked. Even project manager, they can easily just monitor the status of the project, how many tasks need to be completed by which team member, what is the total percentage of tasks are completed, how much configuration part is pending. Everything the manager can just monitor all the project related activities. Okay, this is the basic purpose we can use. Apart from that, through function setup manager only we can do the data uploads. We can load the data loads. Okay, we can do the loading, or we can export the data exports and imports you can do by using this. Okay, function setup manager, even you can run the reports also to know the status of. Okay, if you don't want to go through one by one through project and all, you can just run the reports to know the progress of the project. Okay, so there you can see have a very graphical representation how much percentage of task project is completed, with pie charts and the different representation is there, that we'll see when we are doing. Okay, these are the simple points to understand when you talk about functional setup manager. What is the use of functional setup manager means? Simple point you can say, to do the system configuration we'll be using the functional setup manager. But when you talk about the sequence of activities which we have to perform and we are going to work on this functional setup manager, first we have to enable the offerings and options, then we'll create implementation project, we'll select, system will generate, we'll assign, then we'll start doing the configuration. That's how we'll be doing. So within the functional setup manager you cannot have any access. Through functional setup manager you cannot have any access to the functions like invoice creation, payment creation, or transaction creation, or receipt. Okay, this kind of task you won't have access because functional setup manager only for the purpose of system configuration. There won't be any function will be available where you can do some transaction related activity. To have access to the transaction part, you should assign the different roles to the user based on which application the user or which features the user want to access. Okay, so these are the points to discuss on function setup manager. Once we get into that, there are a few more points which will touch those points and will be run through the classes. We'll see that later. On these points, if anybody has any question, you can ask me. We'll discuss now. So any question on these points, function setup manager? You can get access to functional setup manager by assigning application implementation consultant role to your user. If you assign application implementation consultant role to your user, you will be able to have access to this function setup manager. Any questions on this FSM? Okay, fine. Seems to no questions. Fine. So done. Okay, what we'll do is today we'll just see how to create the user. We'll see the user creation. Okay. So when we talk about user in EBS, we have a seeded user which will get along with that fresh environment is sysadmin, right? But Fusion, to have access to application, okay, you'll have a Excel sys ADM. This will get to access to IDM. Okay. Excel sys ADM. With this user, you can access to IDM or OAM. You could call OAM. They are seeded users. And to access to the application, we have a user called as FA admin. Okay, FA means Fusion Applications Admin for applications. Okay, these are the two seeded users you can find in the Fusion environment. With function setup manager, if with FA admin, you can have access to the application. Okay, and with the Excel sys ADM, you can have access to IDM. But it is not mandatory you have to use the different users to access application and IDM. If you have access to application, from application you can navigate to IDM also. There is separate task. By using the task, you can switch from applications to IDM, where this IDM or OM are part of middleware tools, okay, which we can where we can create the users and we can do the role assignment and other activities. Okay. Now for application we have FA admin and for IDM we have a Excel sysadmin. Now let's see, just we'll log into the instance and we'll create one user. Okay. So if you can log into the system as a FA admin, then you can do all these activities. Now just I'm going to create one user. Okay, seems to they're just doing some. Okay, fine. Seems they are doing some maintenance and all. Okay, it's not connecting now. Okay. Anyway, in the next session we'll start working with the instance and all. Okay, because we don't have any plan to just use this instance for today, so we might be doing some maintenance activity. Fine. So then that's all for today. Then we'll connect in the next weekend and we'll we'll go through all these user creation and then by using the functional setup manager we'll create the project, and we'll start with the calendar, chart of accounts, primary ledger. Then we'll get into this enterprise structure definition, and first we'll go through all the subledger application. After completing all subledger we'll just come back to GL and we'll be discussing about GL. Okay, so almost these are the points we have for today. Okay, and the course content, I think yesterday I just forgot to share with you. So this is what in functional setup manager, as an introduction demo, this is what we cover, and from IDM or APM, this is what we'll be covering. From functional setup manager, this is what we'll be just learning about status tracking, understanding task list, everything. Okay, overview of offering documentation, wrapper implementation process. Through BPM, we'll be just covering the payables invoice approval process and GL approval processes. The enterprise structure already discussed, the same will be creating the system. When I talk about GL, these are the concepts we'll be covering for general ledger application. Case of accounts payables, these are the concepts we'll be covering, all the configuration under different concepts. And from purchasing, these are the setups we'll be doing, all these setups we'll do. And we'll see the, like we'll set the approvals for purchase orders also. And we'll create invoice by matching the PO. And the receivable side will do all the required configuration. And when we talk about transaction process, these concepts will be covering. And cash management will do the bank statement reconciliations. And from fixed assets, we'll do the system configuration, and we'll be covering all these concepts which are listed here. And fusion expense, I can just show you the configuration, but process is not working since we have some bug. Where we have bug, and if you have access to the right instance where you can go ahead with the setups, that I'll be explaining. And fusion tax will do the tax configuration, R2R flow configuration, and we will create invoice where system will calculate the tax based on our configuration. So these are the applications and these are the concepts we are going to cover throughout this course. Okay, if anybody has any question, you can ask me based on today's session or regarding this course. Yes, maintenance activity they are doing seems to find it. Any questions? So anybody has any question on this today's session or yesterday's session regarding this course? If you have something, you can ask me, we'll discuss. Okay, fine. Fine. Seems to no questions.
Lakshman, I have a question for you.
Yeah, please.
Lakshman, regarding the exporting or loading the data.
Okay.
Okay. Is it just the setup data we can load, or the raw data that we have for the transactions as well we can load?
Setup.
Or
yeah.
Just say, for example, only the setup, or I mean, obviously the data. When I set the transaction, that won't be allowable from this point.
Any type of data.
Any type of data. You mean the existing roles for the users that we have, those as well we can load?
Existing?
See, let's say I have a system, I have a test instance where even the users and employees, they are already, defined. Even that data we can load into the system, not the target system.
Yeah, when you talk about employee related, means user and employee created from HCM. Yeah, HCM employee related data you can load from HCM side. For that,
of course, yes.
have templates that can be done.
Okay, that's all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Any other questions? Fine. If no questions, we can wind up the session for today. From tomorrow, from next weekend, I'll be taking definitely for 2 hour session, Saturday and Sunday. If it is okay for everyone, I can take more than 2 hours also. Okay, that would be our plan. And any other questions, you can ask me, or else we can wind up the session for today. Fine. Fine, then seems to no question I can see here. Okay, thanks for joining the session. See you in the next weekend. Have a good night and good day.